Okay, in our continuing series on color, let's talk about how to design a color scheme. We want a simple scheme that we're going to apply to a user interface. One of the things we want is for any user interface, web page, interaction, whatever, we want a consistent color scheme. Don't jump around. Keep it consistent, keep it simple. Here is a simple mechanical way to design an acceptable color scheme. If you're a designer, you'll look at this and say, I can do better, I can be more flexible. But if you want to get something that's just good and not hideous, this is a simple technique, and I think you'll enjoy it. So, first thing we need to do is review human vision principles. Remember, what we're looking for is with information, we need to contrast on the value scale. We're going to review our color models here in a minute. You should have already seen that video. The reason we want to contrast in value is we don't always want to depend on one set of cones. We need good broad spectrum sensing, so it makes it easy to get information. We're trying to make things simple for the user, not challenging. Okay, also remember the peripheral vision. Peripheral vision, as we've talked about before, is our way of gaining parallel access to the entire display. Remember, your peripheral vision is gray, no color, and it's low resolution, so it looks blurry. We need to deal with both of those issues as we design a good color scheme. So here's some examples on how that comes together. This message is actually hard to read. It's hard for me to look at. It's hard for a lot of people to look at. The reason is that the text is only in blue, and the only contrast it has with its background is the hue. So remember, blue has the fewest number of cones of everything. It's like 3% of the cones, 2, 3, 4% of the cones. Very few cones, which means if you're relying exclusively on those cones to get your text understanding, this thing is very low resolution, very hard. Also, the contrast means I'm comparing two different kinds of cones. I can't just look at this and say, oh, two values. This is very hard for people to work with. It's really hard for your periphery to deal with. So, here's what this looks like once we take out all the color. So we completely desaturate this thing, take out all the color so it's grayscale, and now it's really hard to read. Basically, you have completely, with this color scheme, you completely disengaged the periphery, which has all sorts of attention problems, finding problems, searching problems, as we've talked about before. So, don't do this. It looks exciting. Computer scientists are notorious for grabbing primary colors. Look, it's flashy. Actually, it's just ugly. Okay, so why does this work? It's blue, and we said blue text is hard because of the cones. Well, it's a desaturated blue for one. By being a desaturated blue, there's a lot of gray in it, which means there's a lot of red and there's a lot of green. Why doesn't it look red and green? Well, because blue is the dominant hue. That's what stands out in terms of the color sensing. We're actually picking up and exciting a lot of sensors. The other thing is we've got a lot of contrast with the background. In the value scale, there's a lot of contrast, so that doesn't look quite so bad. We could use more contrast to be comfortable, but as a headline or a title, not bad. Okay, let's review the hue saturation value model because we're going to use that in a lot of our color designs. RGB is what your eye sees, what your computer produces. HSV is the easiest to design with. Okay, so let's look at value. Value goes from dark to light. Over here it goes from dark to light. Light and darker. It's not more colorful. It's lighter or darker. Lighter or darker. That's value. Okay, this is a color chooser. I think I took this one from Photoshop. It's very good for showing who's... Okay, saturation. Here's saturation. Notice up here it's bright because the value is high. But here there's lots of color. And here there's almost no color. Okay, so this edge is very gray, achromatic as they say, no color. This edge is very colorful. Now over here it's dark, but it still has lots of color. Here's your browns, which is a dark orange. So lots of color, no color. No color basically means we're exciting all of the cones. So we've got a uniform amount of red, green, and blue. Okay? Lots of color, no color. High saturation, low saturation. There's that axis right there. Students get confused on this one more than any other. High saturation, low saturation. It's the amount of color. Value is how much light. Light, dark. Light, dark. Independent of the color. Okay, and over here is hue. Hue is where are we on the color wheel. So basically we start here at 0 and we go to 120 for green, and we go to what is that, 2 something something for blue, and then we come back around to 360 through the purples. So the purples lie between the blues and the reds. We've got the turquoise between the green and the blue, and we've got the yellows and oranges between the red and the green. Okay, this is which color is it? This is how much color as opposed to no color, and this is how bright is it. Light and dark. Hue, saturation, value. I wanted to get that review because we're going to talk about this. This is fun. Understanding this one is fundamental to understanding color design. Okay, here's a variation that's close but not the same. Close but not the same. This is a hue, saturation, lightness, and this is pulled from Microsoft Office, from their color chooser. Okay, so let's go here. So here's hue. Again, we go from red through the greens, blues, purples, and back to red again. That's the hue. Same as before, no problem. Here's saturation. No color, lots of color. Okay, so gray at the bottom. Lightness here, this is not value. This is not the same as value. What lightness is doing is blending from our color into white. Not into light or bright, but into white. That's different. Because this right here is a very low saturation color. It's not uniform saturation across here at all. This is blending from our color, primary color into black. Again, low saturation. Value is independent of saturation. This axis is not. But it turns out this actually ends up being a really nice scale for some of the design decisions we want to make. So we want to remember this one. We'll come back to it. Okay, so our principles are we want good text contrast. Good text contrast in the value scale. So we want our text and our background, or back text and background, either way, but we want on the value scale, we want lots of contrast. We don't want text and background. If we're close together in here, that's going to be really hard to see. We really want to avoid contrast only and hue. So sometimes people will say, I'll pick a color right here, and then I'll have a blue and a green. Bad, 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 bad. That is so hard to see. You need the contrast here, not here. Okay, and then the other thing we want to do is we want to be careful about high saturation colors. Sometimes we really want to reach out and grab eyeballs. Mostly we want a pleasant environment to work. So get off that high saturation. Yes, it makes it look jazzy. Yes, it's a lot of fun, but it's really tedious to work at. Get down here, lower your saturation. If you want some color, get into this area here, not over here in the high saturation, because this will be much more pleasant, much more peaceful. For some things, games, advertising, you may want to get out here and grab some eyeballs. But if people are trying to work and use, stay over in here. Okay, those are our 3 principles. Text and other information. Contrast using value. Avoid using just hue differences. And be careful about high saturation colors. All right. Color schemes. We're going to build a basic color scheme. It's going to use a key color. It's going to use tints and shades. It's going to use an accent color. Pretty straightforward. So we pick our key color. We're going to add black and white because those are our high contrast in value. Then we're going to add a tint and a shade. I'll show you what that is. And then we're going to pick an accent color. This is pretty easy to build a scheme pretty quickly, and it will be good. It might not be great, but it will be good. All right, pick a key color. So we said we were going to stay off the high saturated colors, so I picked a green. Okay, it's a forest green. Maybe I might have picked a darker green, whatever, but I picked a green. Pick a key color. Okay, and then we picked white. We always have white up here. And we want to compute something called a tint. A tint is a blend between our color and white. Now if you're painting with watercolors, you get that by mixing in more water, which lets the white paper show through. That's where the tint comes from. Okay, so you pick something not necessarily halfway. I mean, you can be somewhere along in here. You want enough that it makes a difference. But between your key color and white, that's your tint. Now, if we want to use the lightness scale, this is where this lightness scale came in. So here's our key color right here. And picking a tint is easy. You just go up this scale and pick it right there. That's why they use this. Because I can stay with the same hue and saturation, keep those constant, and I can just easy grab me a tint, and we'll do a shade here in a minute. Okay, same thing. If we're over in a standard hue saturation value, there's our key color. There's black. Pick a color somewhere in between. Somewhere on this line here. It'll keep the same hue. It'll keep the same. It'll tend to desaturate, not so much because of less saturation, it's because we just ending up in black anyway. Okay, so there we go. It's got a dark green color. So I've got a light green, my key green, dark green, and I've got black. Okay, let's look at in the lightness. The lightness was easy. Here was our key color. We just pick something down here. It's automatically doing this blend with black to give us a shade. So blending with black gives you a shade, blending with white gives you a tint, and this is a simple color. Pick a key, white, tint, key, shade, black. Very easy. You can throw this together in seconds, and it'll look pretty good. Okay, now if you want to spark it up a little bit, which we almost always do, then we pick an accent. Okay, so we start from our key color, and a good idea, not universally, but a good idea is change the hue. Because what we're doing is we're looking for something to add a little spark. Maybe you also increase the saturation. We're not going to use this big, we're going to use this a little bit. It's sort of like the salt and pepper. You know, here's the meat and potatoes, but here are the condiments. Just a little bing. So changing the hue, what is it? You do what sort of looks good to you. But a lot of these will look fairly good. You can pick them out pretty easily. Alright, now one of the things that's very important to do is test what you've got. Test what you've got. So I just threw together a very simple layout like this and said, if I pick these colors, what will this look like? Now, what I did, notice here that my gradient, we've talked before about gradients, my gradient here is staying just between these two colors. What we want to do is to get our good text contrast, we want to make sure that text is at least 2 and probably 3 spaces apart between foreground and background. Okay, so here we've got shade on tint, so it's 2 apart. We don't want them together, that'll be hard to read. We want some separation because these are all separated on the value scale. Okay, black over that tint is actually easier to read. Our gradient, by staying always in here, in this range right here, or we could always stay in this range right here and use light text, we preserve our value contrast. So it really simplifies a lot of those things. If you want a gradient, go up here, go down here, then you'll be okay. You can easily pick a color. It'll give you good text contrast. Notice here we used the shade for the background of this button, and we used white as the text. And here's our accent. It's just a piece of spice to add in. Little borders, little highlights, whatever. There's our accent color. Okay, so it's very important once you've got one of these to produce something like this. The kinds of buttons, the kinds of controls, and how will this be reflected in the kinds of things you want to look at. Okay, very simple. Throw it together. It'll look pretty good. It will not look ghastly. Now here's a tool that can help you. This is color.adobe.com. It's free. You go there and it's got thousands and thousands of color schemes. And you can go up and down and you can select themes. People have built theme upon theme upon theme. Scrolling through these and getting ideas is really good. A really good thing to do. But what I usually do is I usually use this little button over here. Okay, it turns out it gives you more control than just picking somebody else's color scheme. One of the downsides of color.adobe.com is these schemes are not designed for user interfaces. These schemes are designed more for how would I paint my home. Okay? How would I arrange so that I have my tablecloths and my centerpiece and everything else so they look good in a nice combination. So for example, the contrast between here and here, this text over this background would be bad. This text over this background would be better, but not great. They haven't designed this for information. So I go right here, click this thing right here, and this is what you're going to see. And the fun begins right in this little guy right here. So if I grab this right here, I can actually move this around, and it will generate down here for me a huge number of color schemes. I can just scroll through there and watch color schemes to my heart content. What I've picked here is monochromatic color schemes. Very much like the ones that we were doing in our basic color scheme. So you pick the monochromatic, you take this, you move it around, it'll generate you a whole bunch of colors that work well together, and then you add white and black onto the ends. You can get, and this one right here will adjust how bright or how dark your base color is. So you can control that. In and out is saturation, round and around is hue. Now there are other ways for building color schemes. Here they are. You can learn a lot just by clicking on them, dragging them around and seeing what they do and seeing how they lay out the other colors within the color wheel here. Okay, I recommend you do that. But here's how you very rapidly try to choose a monochromatic scheme, which is the kind we had. We basically had a modified monochromatic because we also added an accent color instead of just the basic hues. Okay, so here they are, same hue, all in a line. Variations in saturation and variations in brightness. That's how they're producing this color scheme. Now, this is also really good when you're building user interfaces because of what's right down here. Right down here we have the hue saturation values for the colors. We have the RGB values for the colors right there. CMYK, which remember we talked about. And then underneath here, just below, which you can't quite see, is actually the hex values for the color if you're trying to put this into a website or something like that. They calculated that all out for you, and it's great. Okay, basic principles. Information contrast in the value scale, not in the hue scale. Value, 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 value. And for regular working environments, be careful about high saturation. Stay away from high saturation. You don't want to pop people's eyebrows. You just want to draw their attention in useful ways. Okay, that's basic color schemes. Have fun designing.